10 years of marriage. That's what we were supposed to be celebrating. Instead, under the crystal chandelier of our favorite restaurant, my husband raised his champagne flute, looked past me at the 20-something blonde 3 tables away, and slid a manila folder across the velvet booth. "Happy anniversary," he smirked. We were the couple everyone envied, Julian and Clara Hastings. To the outside world, our lives were a carefully curated editorial spread of marital success. Julian was a newly minted senior partner at Sterling and Hayes, one of the most ruthless and prestigious corporate law firms in Chicago. I ran a highly sought-after interior design boutique, catering to the city's elite. We lived in a stunning, meticulously restored historic brownstone in the Gold Coast neighborhood, a home I had poured my heart, soul, and design expertise into. We had wealth, we had status, and until the night of our 10th anniversary, I genuinely believed we had love. Looking back, the warning signs were scattered throughout our perfectly polished life, like shards of broken glass on a white rug, practically invisible until they cut you. There were the late nights at the office, justified by the seemingly endless demands of the Vanguard merger. There was the sudden, inexplicable change in his iPhone password from my birth year to a random string of numbers he refused to share, citing client confidentiality. There was the subtle, lingering scent of white gardenias on his lapel when he came home at 2 a.m, a floral note so entirely unlike the heavy, masculine Tom Ford cologne he religiously wore. I had asked him about it once, casually, while pouring him a scotch. He didn't even blink, smoothly blaming the aggressively perfumed wife of a major client he had been entertaining. I believed him. Or rather, I chose to believe him, because confronting the alternative would mean shattering the exquisite reality I had built for us. For our 10th anniversary, Julian insisted on pulling out all the stops. He secured our favorite booth at the Wellington, a hyper-exclusive, Michelin-starred establishment where the lighting made everyone look like a cinema star, and the waiting list was 6 months long. I had spent hours preparing for that evening. I wore an emerald green silk gown, a dress Julian had specifically ordered for me from a boutique in Milan. I had my hair swept up, my makeup flawless, wearing the diamond tennis bracelet he had gifted me on our 5th anniversary. I wanted to remind him of the woman he fell in love with a decade ago, back when we were just 2 hungry graduates sharing cheap takeout in a cramped apartment, dreaming of the empire we would build together. When I arrived at the restaurant, stepping out of the black town car into the crisp, rain-washed Chicago evening, my heart fluttered with a familiar, naive excitement. The maitre d' greeted me by name and led me through the dimly lit, jazz-infused dining room to our secluded velvet booth. Julian was already there, looking impossibly handsome in his tailored charcoal suit. But as I slid into the booth opposite him, something felt horribly wrong. The atmosphere between us was entirely devoid of the warmth one would expect on a milestone anniversary. His posture was rigid, his jaw set, and his eyes, those striking slate-gray eyes I had stared into a million times, were cold, calculated, and distinctly distant. "You look beautiful, Clara," he said, but his voice lacked any real inflection. It was the same tone he used when closing a routine real estate contract. "Thank you, Julian," I replied, forcing a smile, trying to push down the sudden, inexplicable knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. "And you look incredibly handsome. 10 years. I can barely believe it." He didn't return the smile. Instead, he signaled our waiter, a distinguished older man named Harrison, who knew our preferences by heart. Harrison stepped forward with a chilled bottle of 1998 Dom Perignon. The cork was popped with a muffled, elegant sigh, and the golden liquid cascaded into our crystal flutes. "To us?" I asked, raising my glass, my hand trembling slightly. Julian's fingers curled around the stem of his flute. He didn't look at me. His gaze drifted over my shoulder, locking onto something or someone else in the dining room. I followed his line of sight. 3 tables away, sitting alone in a pool of soft, ambient light, was a young woman. She had cascading blonde hair, a sleek crimson dress that left very little to the imagination, and a smug, predatory smile dancing on her lips. I recognized her instantly. It was Audrey Vance, the 26-year-old junior paralegal Julian had supposedly been mentoring for the past 8 months, the same Audrey who favored white gardenia perfume. My breath caught in my throat. A freezing sensation began at the base of my spine and violently rushed up to my chest. Julian turned his attention back to me, his expression hardening into something entirely unrecognizable. He reached into his leather briefcase resting on the plush seat beside him and pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder. He didn't say a word as he placed it on the pristine white tablecloth. Slowly, deliberately, he pushed it across the table until it rested directly in front of my plate of untouched amuse-bouche. "Happy anniversary," he smirked, raising his champagne flute to his lips and taking a slow, deliberate sip. My hands felt entirely numb as I reached for the folder. The thick parchment paper inside felt heavy, almost toxic. I flipped the cover open, my eyes instantly scanning the bold, black legal typography at the top of the first page. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The world around me seemed to stop. The smooth jazz playing over the speakers faded into a muted, ringing buzz in my ears. The clinking of silverware from the surrounding tables vanished entirely. There were only those words, staring back at me like a death sentence. 10 years of loyalty. 10 years of unwavering support. 10 years of sacrificing my own ambitions to ensure his star rose faster and brighter, all neatly reduced to a stack of legally binding paper on our 10th anniversary dinner. "I've already signed my portions," Julian said, his voice cutting through the deafening silence in my head. It was eerily calm, devoid of any guilt or remorse. "My attorneys have drafted a very generous settlement. You will receive a lump sum of $200,000, and you can keep the design business, of course. The Gold Coast brownstone, however, is solely in my name, purchased through the firm's trust. I'm giving you 30 days to pack your things and vacate the premises." I stared at him, desperately searching his face for any sign that this was a sick, twisted joke. There was none. He was looking at me with the detached annoyance of a man trying to swat away a particularly persistent fly. "Julian," I whispered, my voice cracking, failing to project the strength I desperately needed. "What are you doing? After everything we've built?" "What we built, Clara, was a stepping stone," he replied coldly, leaning in slightly, resting his forearms on the table. "You were wonderful for a young associate trying to look stable and grounded. But I'm a senior partner now. My life is moving in a different direction, a much faster, more dynamic direction. And frankly, playing house with you has become incredibly exhausting." Before I could even process the sheer cruelty of his words, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. Audrey Vance had risen from her table. She walked toward us with the slow, deliberate strut of a victor claiming her spoils. Every step she took in her designer heels seemed to echo against the hardwood floor of the restaurant. She stopped right beside Julian, casually resting a manicured hand on his shoulder. The heavy, suffocating scent of white gardenias instantly washed over our table, making me deeply nauseous. "Evening, Clara," Audrey purred, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She looked down at me, her eyes sparkling with malicious triumph. I hope Julian wasn't too blunt. "We discussed how to handle this, but you know how men are. Always wanting to rip the Band-Aid off quickly. We discussed. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. They had planned this. They had orchestrated this exact moment, in this public space, to humiliate me. Julian knew I abhorred public scenes. He knew I would rather swallow my own tongue than scream and cry in the middle of the Wellington. He had weaponized my dignity against me to ensure a clean, quiet, unquestioning compliance. Julian reached up and gently covered Audrey's hand with his own. It was a gesture of profound intimacy, one he hadn't shown me in over a year. "Audrey and I are in love, Clara," he stated matter-of-factly. "She understands the demands of my world in a way you never truly could. We're planning to move into the brownstone together once you've vacated. The settlement offer is non-negotiable, by the way. If you try to fight me in court, I promise you, with the legal team I have at my disposal, I will bury you so deep you won't even be able to afford the rent on a studio apartment." A profound, terrifying silence settled over me. In that fractured second, the Clara who had loved Julian Hastings died. The devoted wife, the supportive partner, the woman who turned a blind eye to the red flags out of a desperate desire to keep her family intact, she vanished, evaporated into the scent of expensive champagne and cheap gardenia perfume. In her place, something else awoke, something dark, freezing cold, and brilliantly sharp. I looked at the divorce papers. $200,000. For 10 years of my life. For designing the very home he was now kicking me out of to move in his paralegal. For playing the dutiful corporate wife while he climbed over the backs of his peers. He thought he held all the cards. He thought his legal prowess made him invincible. But Julian Hastings, in all his arrogant, narcissistic glory, had made one massive, fatal miscalculation. He had forgotten who designed his life. Literally, when we bought the historic brownstone, the extensive renovations were entirely my domain. Julian was too busy with his billable hours to care about architectural details. He had given me a blank check and full creative control, which meant I was the one who designed his magnificent mahogany-paneled home office. I was the one who hired the private contractor to install the custom cabinetry. And I was the one who oversaw the installation of the hidden biometric floor safe beneath the Persian rug, a safe Julian thought was entirely off the grid. He also didn't know that 6 months ago, while looking for our misplaced passports, I had accidentally discovered the bypass code for that safe. Inside, I hadn't found love letters or physical cash. I had found an encrypted external hard drive and a physical ledger. A ledger that detailed exactly how Julian and his mentor, Richard Hayes, were funneling millions of dollars of client retainer funds through a network of offshore shell companies based in the Cayman Islands. Companies cleverly masked under the umbrella of the Vanguard merger. He was offering me $200,000, unaware that I held the key to sending him, his precious Audrey, and the senior partners of Sterling and Hayes to federal prison for the next 20 years. I slowly closed the manila folder. I didn't cry. I didn't throw my champagne in his face. I didn't give Audrey the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I carefully picked up my velvet clutch, smoothed the invisible wrinkles from my emerald silk dress, and looked Julian dead in the eye. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face, one that made him momentarily falter. "Keep the pen, Julian," I said, my voice as smooth and deadly as polished glass. "You're going to need it to sign a hell of a lot more than just divorce papers very, very soon." Without another word, I stood up, turned my back on my husband and his mistress, and walked out of the Wellington. The night air was biting as I stepped onto the pavement, but I didn't feel the cold. The tears I had been holding back never came. I pulled out my phone, scrolled past the photos of my dead marriage, and found the contact number for Owen Vance, a ruthlessly efficient forensic accountant I had used for my business, and ironically, Audrey's estranged older brother who despised Julian. I pressed call. The phone rang twice. "Owen," I said as he answered, stepping into the back of a waiting cab. "It's Clara Hastings. Cancel whatever you have tomorrow morning. I need to hire you. We're going to dismantle an empire." In the end, Julian lost his prestigious firm, our historic brownstone, and his precious mistress. I didn't just survive the fire he set to our marriage. I became the inferno that burned his fraudulent life to ash. Today, sitting on my Parisian balcony with a perfect glass of Bordeaux, I finally understand the truth. The best revenge isn't simply moving on. It is taking absolutely everything he ever valued. The morning after my anniversary dinner, the Chicago sky was the color of bruised iron. I hadn't slept a single minute. Instead, I had sat in the darkened living room of the brownstone, his brownstone, supposedly watching the rain lash against the custom-arched windows I had painstakingly sourced from an architectural salvage yard in Paris. Every drop felt like a drumbeat, counting down the 30 days I had left to execute the destruction of Julian Hastings. At exactly 8 a.m., I walked into the cramped, paper-strewn office of Owen Vance. Owen was the antithesis of his younger sister. Where Audrey was polished, predatory, and draped in designer labels bought on someone else's dime, Owen was rumpled, chronically exhausted, and possessed a mind like a steel trap. He operated a boutique forensic accounting firm that specialized in tracing hidden assets during high-net-worth divorces. I had recommended him to several of my affluent design clients who found themselves on the wrong side of a prenuptial agreement. He respected me. More importantly, he actively despised his sister. "Clara," Owen said, looking up from a mountain of tax returns, his wire-rimmed glasses slipping down his nose. He took in my pale face and the absolute absence of my usual composed warmth. You look like you're about to murder someone or buy a small country. Sit down. Coffee? No coffee, Owen, I said, taking the seat across from him and placing my sleek leather tote on his desk. I need you to help me ruin a man, and unfortunately, your sister is going to be collateral damage. Owen paused, a half-filled mug of black coffee hovering near his lips. He set it down slowly. Audrey, what has she done now? I gave him the short, brutal version of the anniversary dinner. I watched the muscle in Owen's jaw twitch, his expression darkening from professional curiosity to genuine disgust. He had estranged himself from Audrey years ago, tired of bailing her out of toxic situations and enabling her relentless social climbing. But knowing she had targeted a married man, a senior partner at a firm like Sterling and Hayes, was a new low, even for her. Julian Hastings is a shark, Clara, Owen warned, leaning back in his creaking chair. If he handed you papers with a non-negotiable settlement, he's already fortified his accounts. He's hidden the real money. 200,000 is an insult, but fighting him conventionally will cost you double that in legal fees, and he knows it. I have no intention of fighting him conventionally, I replied. I leaned forward, lowering my voice, despite the fact that we were alone. Owen, what do you know about the Vanguard merger? The telecommunications deal? It's massive. Sterling and Hayes' crown jewel this quarter. Richard Hayes and your husband are the lead architects on it. Why? Because Julian has a biometric floor safe in his home office. He thinks I don't know it exists, let alone the numerical bypass code. I watched Owen's eyes widen. 6 months ago, I found a physical ledger and an encrypted external hard drive inside. I didn't understand the technicalities, but I recognized the names of Cayman Island shell companies, and I saw millions of dollars being routed away from client retainer accounts and into private holding trusts, all under the guise of Vanguard. The silence in the office was absolute, broken only by the hum of the ancient radiator. Owen stared at me, the implications crashing over him. Clara, he breathed, wiping a hand across his face. If what you're saying is true, that isn't just hidden marital assets. That is massive wire fraud, embezzlement, and a violation of the RICO Act. That's federal prison. I need to clone that drive and photograph that ledger before my 30 days are up, I said, my voice eerily calm. Can you decrypt it? If it's a standard corporate encryption, yes. But I need the raw data, and I need it without triggering any internal security software Julian might have installed on the drive. Owen opened a locked drawer in his desk and pulled out a small metallic device no larger than a deck of cards. This is a hardware cloner. It bypasses the operating system and makes a bit-for-bit replica. It leaves absolutely no digital footprint. But you have to get physical access to that drive, and you cannot get caught. The opportunity presented itself 3 nights later. Julian had informed me, with a distinct layer of smugness, that he would be spending the weekend at a corporate retreat in Aspen. I knew, of course, that Audrey had booked 2 first-class tickets to Colorado earlier that week. The moment his black town car pulled away from the curb on Friday evening, I locked the front door, drew the heavy velvet curtains, and walked into his mahogany-paneled office. My heart was a frantic bird in my chest as I rolled back the Persian rug. There it was, the sleek, flush-mounted steel of the safe. I knelt down, my hands trembling slightly as I punched in the bypass code I had memorized 6 months ago, the 18th of April, 2092, the date Richard Hayes had founded the firm. Julian's loyalty was to his mentor, never to me. With a soft electronic click, the heavy lid hissed open. I worked with surgical precision. I connected Owen's cloner to the encrypted drive. A small blue light began to pulse, indicating the data transfer had begun. While it whirred, I pulled out the physical, leather-bound ledger. Using a high-resolution scanning app on my phone, I photographed every single page. Page after page of damning handwritten notes in Julian's unmistakable scrawl, detailing percentage cuts, offshore routing numbers, and bribes disguised as consulting fees. 20 minutes later, the cloner's light turned solid green. I packed everything back exactly as I had found it, closed the safe, and rolled the rug back into its precise position. As I stood up, staring at the empty room, a profound sense of peace washed over me. The anxiety was gone. replaced by the icy thrill of a hunter watching her prey walk into a snare. For the next 3 weeks, I gave Julian exactly what he wanted, the illusion of total victory. I played the part of the defeated, emotionally shattered, soon-to-be ex-wife flawlessly. I packed my belongings into brown cardboard boxes, labeling them with a thick black marker. I signed a lease on a beautiful but significantly smaller apartment in the West Loop, a downgrade that visibly pleased Julian when he saw the paperwork left carelessly on the kitchen island. His arrogance blossomed into something truly grotesque. Emboldened by my apparent compliance, he stopped hiding. He began bringing Audrey over to the brownstone while I was still packing. "I just want to get a feel for the space," Audrey had announced one Tuesday afternoon, breezing past me in the hallway carrying a stack of fabric swatches. She looked at the meticulously curated living room I had designed. "Julian, darling, we really must do something about these heavy drapes. They feel so archaic. I'm thinking sheer linen, something that lets the light in." "Whatever you want, baby," Julian had replied, kissing her temple while shooting me a sidelong glance, daring me to react. I was kneeling on the floor, wrapping a crystal vase in bubble wrap. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I simply looked up, offered a tight, defeated smile, and said, "Sheer linen would be lovely, Audrey. Very. Transparent." They laughed, missing the irony entirely. They thought they were measuring for curtains in their new kingdom. I knew they were measuring the dimensions of their own coffin. Behind the scenes, the trap was snapping shut. Owen had worked miracles. "It's a masterpiece of corporate theft," he told me over a secure line, his voice vibrating with a mix of professional awe and deep disgust. Julian and Richard Hayes haven't just been defrauding their clients, they've been defrauding their own partners. The Vanguard merger is just a washing machine for dirty money. I've traced $35 million to 4 accounts in the Caymans. Clara, we have them dead to rights. With Owen's explosive dossier in hand, I needed a weapon to wield it. I found one in Victoria Carmichael. Victoria was a legend in the Chicago legal scene. She was a silver-haired, impeccably tailored apex predator who specialized in high-stakes litigation and harbored a well-documented fiery disdain for the old boys club mentality of Sterling and Hayes. When I sat in her glass-walled office overlooking the Chicago River and slid Owen's massive binder across her desk, she had looked at me with mild skepticism. By the time she finished reading the executive summary, her eyes were burning with a predatory gleam. "Mrs. Hastings," Victoria said, leaning back and steepling her fingers, a terrifying smile playing on her lips. "I expected a woman scorned asking for alimony. You have just handed me the legal equivalent of a tactical nuclear weapon. I don't want alimony, Victoria," I stated evenly. "I want the $200,000 settlement Julian offered me to be legally binding, so he can't claim I extorted him. What I want is the brownstone transferred fully into my name. I want my legal fees paid. And then, I want you to send this dossier to the federal prosecutor's office, the SEC, and the disciplinary board of the state bar." Victoria chuckled, a dark, rich sound. "You understand that if we expose this, the firm will likely implode. Julian will be disbarred and face decades in federal prison. His assets, the ones not protected, will be seized. I understand perfectly. He will lose everything." "He already took everything from me," I replied, my voice hard as diamonds. "I'm just returning the favor with interest." The deadline Julian had given me was a Friday. On Thursday afternoon, while the moving trucks were loading my final boxes outside the brownstone, I sent Julian a brief text message. "The house is packed. Before I hand over the keys and sign the final settlement acknowledgement, we need to meet. Your office. 4 p.m. Just us." His reply came 3 minutes later. "Fine, don't be late. I have a dinner reservation with Audrey at 6. I smiled at my phone screen. I was wearing a tailored crimson power suit, a sharp departure from the soft, muted tones I usually wore as a dutiful wife. I slipped a single, sealed manila envelope into my leather briefcase. It didn't contain divorce papers. It contained a summary of the offshore accounts, a photograph of the physical ledger, and a draft of the letter Victoria Carmichael was preparing to send to the FBI. As I walked out of the brownstone, I paused to look at the beautiful, arched windows one last time. Audrey wouldn't be getting her sheer linen drapes after all. In about 24 hours, the only new additions to this house would be federal crime scene tape. I hailed a cab and gave the driver the address for Sterling and Hayes. It was time for my anniversary gift to finally be unwrapped. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor of Sterling and Hayes felt like ascending to Mount Olympus, though I knew I was arriving not as a supplicant, but as the architect of their destruction. The doors chimed open to reveal a sprawling reception area clad in Italian marble and brushed steel. Sarah, the senior receptionist, who had always greeted me with a warm, genuine smile over the past 10 years, looked up. Her eyes flickered with a mixture of pity and discomfort. Clearly, the office rumor mill had already circulated the details of Julian's public discarding of his wife in favor of the junior paralegal. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Hastings," Sarah said softly, her voice carrying a sympathetic lilt. "Mr. Hastings is expecting you. You can go right in." "Thank you, Sarah," I replied, my voice steady, projecting a calm I had spent the last month perfecting. "And it will be Miss Vance very soon. But just for today, Clara is fine." I walked down the long, glass-walled corridor, my crimson heels sinking silently into the plush, custom-woven carpet. As I approached Julian's corner office, I could see him through the glass. He was pacing behind his massive oak desk, shouting into his Bluetooth earpiece, looking every inch the master of his universe. Audrey was perched on the edge of a leather sofa in the corner of the room, idly scrolling through her phone, looking profoundly bored. I pushed the heavy glass door open without knocking. Julian held up a finger, signaling me to wait as he finished his call. "I don't care what the opposing counsel wants, Richard," he barked into the earpiece. "Bury them in discovery. We bleed them dry until they settle. I'll call you back." He tapped his ear, severing the connection, and let out an exasperated sigh. He looked at me, taking in my tailored crimson suit, a stark contrast to the subdued, supportive wife aesthetic he was accustomed to. For a fraction of a second, confusion crossed his features, quickly replaced by his trademark arrogance. "You have exactly 10 minutes, Clara," Julian said, gesturing vaguely to the chair opposite his desk. "I have a dinner reservation at a new tasting menu place in the West Loop at 6, and Audrey hates to be rushed." Audrey didn't even look up from her phone. "Make it 5 minutes, Julian. My feet are killing me." I didn't sit down. I walked directly to his desk, maintaining unbroken eye contact. I unclasped my leather briefcase, reached inside, and pulled out the thick, heavy manila folder Victoria Carmichael had prepared for me. I placed it on his pristine desk. Slowly, deliberately, I pushed it across the polished oak until it rested directly in front of his gold-plated Mont Blanc pen. "Happy early divorce, Julian," I said, mirroring the exact tone and cadence he had used at our anniversary dinner. Julian let out a short, patronizing laugh. "Clara, please don't tell me you brought your own revised settlement. I told you my offer was non-negotiable. If you've hired some strip mall divorce attorney to try and squeeze me for more alimony, you are going to be severely disappointed." "I haven't hired a strip mall attorney," I replied, a cool, detached smile touching the corners of my mouth. "I hired Victoria Carmichael, and I strongly suggest you open the folder." At the mention of Victoria's name, the patronizing amusement instantly vanished from his face. Victoria was the apex predator of Chicago litigation, a name that struck terror into the hearts of corrupt corporate lawyers citywide. Julian swallowed hard, his bravado faltering. He reached for the folder, his fingers hesitating for a fraction of a second before flipping the cover open. I watched him read the first page. It was an executive summary, drafted by Owen Vance, detailing the exact routing numbers, offshore shell company names in the Cayman Islands, and the precise dollar amount siphoned from the Vanguard merger. The physical transformation was immediate and astonishing, all the blood completely drained from Julian's face, leaving him a sickly, ashen gray. His eyes widened in absolute, unadulterated terror. He flipped to the second page, a high-resolution photograph of his own handwritten ledger from the biometric safe. His breathing became shallow, rapid, bordering on hyperventilation. The invincible senior partner of Sterling and Hayes was suddenly looking at a 20-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. "What? What is this?" he stammered, his voice barely a whisper, completely devoid of its usual booming authority. That is a heavily redacted preview of the $35 million you and Richard Hayes have embezzled over the last 4 years, I stated, leaning over his desk, my voice dropping to a lethal, quiet register. You forgot who designed your home office, Julian. You forgot I knew exactly who installed your hidden floor safe, and you made the catastrophic mistake of assuming I was too stupid to figure out the bypass code. Audrey finally looked up from her phone, sensing the sudden, suffocating tension in the room. Julian? What's going on? Julian ignored her, his eyes darting frantically across the documents. You broke into my safe. That's illegal, Clara. This is inadmissible. Oh, it's highly admissible when it's attached to a whistleblower report, I corrected him smoothly. And speaking of your mistress, I believe you owe her brother a massive thank you. Owen Vance is a brilliant forensic accountant. He decrypted your external hard drive in under an hour. He was absolutely disgusted by you, Julian, but he was even more disgusted by Audrey's involvement with a married man. He considered dismantling your life a public service. Audrey stood up, her face flushing crimson. Owen, you went to my brother? Keep your mouth shut, Audrey. Julian suddenly roared, slamming his fist onto the desk, completely losing his composure. He looked back at me, terror giving way to a desperate, cornered panic. What do you want, Clara? How much? Name your price. My price is already in the folder, behind the ledger, I said, stepping back and folding my arms. Victoria drafted a new marital settlement agreement. You are transferring the deed to the Gold Coast brownstone entirely into my name, free and clear. You are paying all of my legal and accounting fees. And, just for the poetic irony of it all, I am accepting your original $200,000 lump sum offer. Julian frantically flipped to the back of the folder, finding the legal documents. He grabbed his Mont Blanc pen, his hand shaking violently as he scrawled his signature across the required pages, initialing the deed transfer without reading a single clause. He was desperate, believing he was buying my silence, trading a house for his freedom. He shoved the signed papers back across the desk toward me, letting out a ragged breath. A nasty, triumphant sneer began to reform on his lips. You're nothing but a blackmailer, Clara. You're just as dirty as you claim I am. I carefully picked up the signed settlement and slid it back into my briefcase, the latch clicking shut with a satisfying finality. I looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing but a profound, liberating coldness. I'm not a blackmailer, Julian, I said softly, walking toward the office door. I'm a whistleblower. Did you know the SEC offers a bounty program for reporting corporate fraud? They pay between 10 and 30% of the total monetary sanctions collected. Victoria filed the official report to the SEC, the FBI, and the State Bar this morning at 9 a.m. Julian froze, the pen slipping from his fingers and clattering onto the oak desk. You said if I signed. I never said I wouldn't send it, I interrupted, my hand resting on the cool metal of the door handle. I just needed you to sign the house over to me before the federal government officially froze all of your assets tomorrow morning. Oh, and Julian, I highly recommend you cancel your dinner reservations. You're going to need that time to find a very good criminal defense attorney. I opened the door and walked out, leaving Julian Hastings gasping for air in his glass cage, with his mistress standing paralyzed in the corner. The fallout was spectacular, swift, and entirely public. At 6 a.m. the following morning, a fleet of black SUVs descended upon the Sterling and Hayes building. Julian and Richard Hayes were arrested, and Perp walked out of their lobby in handcuffs, their faces splashed across the front page of the Chicago Tribune. The firm instantly collapsed under the weight of the federal indictments. Audrey, having been abruptly fired and publicly humiliated, tried to crawl back to her brother, who firmly and permanently shut the door in her face. Last I heard, she had moved back to her hometown in Ohio, working as a receptionist at a mid-tier dental clinic. As for me, the SEC whistleblower bounty eventually paid out a staggering $4 million, my rightful cut of the recovered $35 million. I kept the brownstone, completely redesigning it, stripping away every ounce of Julian's dark, heavy mahogany influence and replacing it with light air and sheer linen drapes. In the end, Julian's arrogance was his own executioner. He traded a loyal partner for a fleeting illusion, unaware he was burning his own empire to the ground. Today, the historic brownstone is entirely mine. My design business is thriving globally, and Julian is serving 15 years in a federal penitentiary. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I prefer it served with a perfect glass of Bordeaux. Cheers.